It's a tough road for artists to try and not completely self-identify with your work and put it out there and just be like, here's this thing, I did it, it's wonderful, I hope you like it. So it definitely is a tough learning lesson.
If you've never heard of Pencil Kings before, we find professional artists and get them to record how they work so that you can learn from professional artists. And today I'm excited to talk to Elise Hatheway, visual development artist at Real Effects. How are you doing today, Elise?
I'm wonderful.
We'll get into your intro story in a second, but what's the 30-second rundown of what a visual development artist does for those that aren't quite familiar with it?
All right, so visual development is basically at the beginning of the film, when you're going between the script phase and actually getting it into production to be made into a 3D animated film. And visual development artists basically take the script and draw everything, paint everything so that you can have a concrete idea of what the movie looks like prior to making the movie. It changes at different studios and different places. So like live action is called a concept artist generally, and in animation we're called visual development.
Awesome. So it's kind of like a storyboard artist, except they would be more concerned with like shot placement and action sequences and how things are going to flow, where you're more in charge of the overall look and feel and like color scheme and all that good stuff for the film, correct?
Correct. Exactly.
Awesome. So now let's dive into your intro story, because you applied to somewhere that most people, I've heard this time and time again when I ask people, what do you want to do with your art? And the answer is almost always, I want to work at Disney. And you actually, you went down that road. And can you tell us how that went and how it turned out for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I went to Savannah College of Art and Design, which is in Georgia. And I was there for animation, and that's all I wanted to do is, work at Disney. And so my senior year, I applied at Disney for an apprenticeship. And kind of like everybody, that was the dream, but you don't expect much because, it's Disney. And amazingly, I actually got a call back, and they told me that they were considering me for this apprenticeship. There was nothing else. That's all I cared about was working at Disney, and I was ready to move. I was looking up apartments and everything, and I actually made it all the way to their finalist stage 2 weeks before they move you out there and you get hired and you start working there. And I was telling everybody that I got hired at Disney and I was moving out there. And then literally about 2 weeks before I was supposed to make the move out there, they were sending me emails about what I was going to be working on, who I was going to be working with, and all this information. And then 2 weeks they came back and they were like, you know what? Sorry, we went with somebody else. Actually, at that point, I was about 4 weeks away from graduation. I hadn't applied anywhere else. I didn't have any other jobs lined up because I was like, I'm working at Disney. Why do I need anything else? And so then it was like this scramble. First, it was just an utter depression because I didn't get the job. But then it was just this scramble of trying to find, something else to do. What do you do when you have nothing else available to you? So that was a really hard but awesome learning lesson in my career, to never rely on, having any job for that matter. You kind of have to, in this industry, you kind of have to have something lined up or always have a backup or always just be ready for the way this industry goes, which changes on a dime.
That's true. My experience was more in video games, but it's just like you show up for work that day. You're like, okay, cool, going to work. Yeah, the projects got canceled last night. Everyone's grumpy and you're like, what? How could this happen? Aren't we already millions of dollars into development on this thing? And then it just disappears overnight.
Exactly. It happens all the time. Even now working in movies, I've worked on a movie for about a year and then they'll switch art directors. And, everything you've worked on for an entire year just gets thrown out because a new art director comes out and they usually want to establish their own style. And so then it's basically like starting from scratch on the movie. With an entirely different style. It's almost like reapplying for a job that you just already have. Interesting changes happen in film, for sure.
Definitely. I'm actually curious, but what do you think it was about your portfolio? If somebody's listening, they have the Disney job, which encouraged people to have the plan B and to be realistic about, where they're at. But from your perspective, what do you think it was that got you noticed and got you to that finalist stage? Because you were basically there,
Yeah, it's a tough thing because I asked for a critique after the fact, and they told me that while they really liked my style and they really liked my work, I was a little too much everywhere across the board. It actually brings up a good point as far as style, because for Disney specifically, in a lot of places, they look for a very concrete style. They want to know exactly what they're going to get with their people because they're looking to fit you into an already successful working pipeline. So if they feel like there's any kind of guesswork where they're not really sure how you're going to fit in, then they're not really sure if they want to make that bet because they're not sure if you are going to fit in. They want to be absolutely certain that you work within their style and what they're going for. And I think I was a little all over the place. And I mean, honestly, I still am. And that's something specifically in my career that I've had to kind of work around. And as I've gotten farther in my career, I've kind of embraced it because usually you look at an artist and you're like, okay, that's this artist's specific style. And I think I kind of jump around, which I personally really like because some days I want to draw cartoons and some days I want to draw like, monsters and hyper realistic stuff. And then other days I just want to draw, SpongeBob. I don't know. That can be really bad in this industry because they want that style. And I kind of like not having a specific style all the time.
All right. So let's say that time machines were invented and we have a time machine right now, and you could hop into that time machine and go back to the year before you were going to graduate school and give advice to yourself. And you see the portfolio and you realize, oh man, I had that critique and they told me that my style needs to be a little bit more concrete. What would you tell that younger version of yourself to really try and get you to hone in on a certain style? Is there something that you would say, or I don't know. I have a few things that come to mind, but I'm curious what you would tell to yourself.
I would probably tell myself to get as many eyes as possible on my portfolio. And that's really tough for students just coming out of college to put their work out there. As artists, we're all very self-esteem, scared that we're going to get rejected or that people aren't going to like our work. But I think that's something that's really, really important because other people are going to see a general trend in your work, or they're going to see something that overall looks the best or that you're the best in that you probably won't see. So I think getting everybody and anybody that you can to look at your work and be like, oh, you know what, these things are really great and I love all of these things, but this doesn't look like it fits or this doesn't look cohesive to the rest of your work. And then you can actually start seeing and analyzing your work and being like, oh, you know what, they're totally right. This doesn't fit my portfolio at all. That way you can start really honing in on what's the best stuff and what makes your portfolio a whole entity that really shows you best.
I like it. If I had had the same advice, I would go back and tell myself to find somebody that's inspiring and that's working on projects that I want to, and then try to see what you can take from that style and incorporate it into your own. Okay, so that was the Disney story. So, you had a setback, you were scrambling a little bit because you had no plan B and you're on the Disney train and then you weren't. Where did you go from there?
Yeah, from there, I kind of, because I went to Savannah College of Art and Design for specifically animation, not for doing visual development. I mean, at SCAD, they didn't really have a visual development major. They had, animation, and then there was illustration, and then they had sequential design. So I figured animation, and honestly, I've been drawing since I was a kid, but I never really thought that, drawing for movies was an actual credible career that I would ever get. So I thought, if I want to work in movies, I've got to go into animation. I've got to be an animator, which I think a lot of people, now still think. I started just focusing on my animation reel after that happened. And so even though I had my art portfolio of concept work, I had a 2D animation portfolio, I had my concept portfolio, and then I had a modeling portfolio. I really didn't like 3D animation, but I really liked 2D animation and I really liked 3D modeling. And so I made portfolios for those. And so after that happened, I went to SIGGRAPH. And I tried to, shop my portfolio around to a bunch of places. And I think it was the Mill. Uh-huh. I went to this lady, it was the end of the day. She had seen probably thousands of other college students trying to find a job. And I walked up to her and I handed her my 2 portfolios of 3D modeling and 2D animation. And she looked at me and she went, "What the hell do you want me to do with this?"
Like, she literally said that?
Yes, that's exactly what she said to me.
Oh man, talk about School of Hard Knocks. That's awesome.
And I was like, oh, I'm just, trying to see if you guys have anything available. She was really, really nice. She was really, blunt with me. But she was really nice, and she basically told me, if you want a job and you want to work in any industry, you need to research the company, and then you need to make your portfolio specifically for that company. She's like, you don't come to some place like the Mill and hand me a 2D animation reel and expect me to do anything with it. And I was like, okay, I guess so. And I walked away with my tail between my legs. But it was really good because I kind of had to make decisions based on that. So luckily, I had a friend of mine who knew somebody who owned Turbo Squid, which is a 3D modeling marketplace online. And they basically make 3D models and then they sell them to commercial companies and film houses and things like that. It's basically like a quick way to get models to get commercials done and things like that. So you don't have to hire modelers. And so luckily, I went there and they hired me on. And I was kind of doing 3D modeling, but I ended up being more in a managerial kind of position where I had a bunch of modelers under my staff, and I kind of got them to do what they needed to model, and then I would check their work and make sure everything was correct. And it was great. It was a wonderful job, and it was an awesome company, but it wasn't artistic, and that was really hard. And I did that for 2 years. Not exactly what I wanted my career to start as, but it was one of those, you have to make a decision at the end of the day and get a job. And so it was go to work 9 to 5 doing this job, and then going home and working all night on my concept work, drawing and painting every single night. In 2010, I had a friend of mine from college who was an animator at Real Effects, and he told me they were starting an apprenticeship program, and he said that he thought I would do really well. So I applied to Real Effects. They called me back. And they were like, okay, well, we really like your work and we think it's really great. We'd like if you could do a phone interview with us on Monday. And I was like, no, I'll see you Monday. And they're like, wait a second, you're in Louisiana, right? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, well, we're in Dallas, Texas. We're about 8 hours away from you. And I was like, yeah, I'll see you Monday. So I literally that Saturday, I jumped in my car. I drove 8 hours so that I could be there on Monday, so that I could have an in-person interview with these guys. And they actually, after I got the job and I started working at Real Effects, they told me that specifically they loved my work and everything like that. But part of the reason that I got the job was because I got in my car and drove 8 hours to come and visit them.
Exactly. I'm so glad that you told that story. What you just told me is amazing. And I want to make sure that the people listening realize just why this is so amazing. There's all these like intangible things that you never really know what's going to make you stand out. Like if you go out, once you're working somewhere and you ask the person, like, why did you hire me? I've gotten noticed by a company because when I worked in China at an outsourcing studio, we didn't have toilet paper in the men's restroom, if you can believe that.
Wow.
And we had an executive from a major video game company come in, and he got up, and part of their due diligence, believe it or not, was to test out the restrooms. And so I like immediately realized what's going to happen here. And it's like, okay, I got to run, grab some TP and from my desk and give it to this guy. Otherwise, it's just not going to be a good experience. And then later on, he contacts me again. It's like, you stood out because you had the foresight to not ask anybody. You just got out of the meeting immediately and took care of this thing. And another example was when I accidentally submitted a story about how much I disliked my high school instead of my resume to a company. And they just brought me in for an interview because they thought it was hilarious. They thought like my portfolio was okay, but they thought the story was hilarious. And so when I got in, I had the interview. I was like, okay, cool, that's great. And then they asked, well, do you have a resume? And I said, well, don't you have it? And they said, no, we just have this hilarious story that you'd sent us. I feel like you just have to sometimes take a chance. Like, don't be too afraid to stand out or do something different. Yeah, driving 8 hours in your car, I'm sure a lot of people would be like, okay, cool, yeah, I'll see you on Monday. But I mean, you had the time to get there, and maybe even if it was just like the night before, you could have driven all through the night, drank some Red Bull, and showed up in the morning. Like, who do you think is going to be the standout person? Who do you think in their eyes is going to be like, who wants to work here the most? Right. The person that drove 8 hours through the night drinking Red Bull and showed up all haggard? I'm not saying that was you, but yeah, it's amazing. So I'm so glad that you told that story, and I hope anyone listening, if you have an opportunity, it's kind of like a recurring story. This has come up a few times now, but don't be afraid to take the leap. Like, there's no set path on being an artist.
I mean, besides showing your personality and things like that, it shows how much more positive you are, because I think that's a tough thing in this. Like once the rejections start coming, which inevitably you will get a rejection letter once in your career, someone's going to tell you no. It becomes hard not to let that show in other interviews that you're dejected and that you're, oh God, I'm not going to get this job. I'm totally going to get rejected. They're not going to like my work. And honestly, people can see that when you go into an interview. They can see that you're like, oh no, this is totally out of my league. And that they need. People don't like that. They want to see the confidence. They want to see the positive. They want to see you come in and be like, you know what? If I don't get this job, that's okay. I'm just so excited you gave me an interview. And you know what? I wanted to come out here and just to meet you guys. And this is wonderful. And that shows. And that happy, good energy makes a total difference.
I have something more. Something none of your dry as dust professors and routine-ridden doctors have. Love, devotion, passion.
Being positive, I think, is, you hit the nail on the head. Very important. What do you think about confidence? I've been doing a lot of studying these days about inner strength and meditation and all this stuff. And one of the things I realized is that when I was younger and getting started, I had this ego, like I am the shit. And I said it tongue in cheek because I knew that I wasn't. I was surrounded by people that were clearly better than I was, but I felt like I had great things inside of me and I put that forward. I'm not sure if that opened doors, but there's like a fine line. Like you don't want to be cocky, but you can still be a little cocky. What do you think about that?
No, I really agree. I had kind of the opposite experience, but I've kind of found my way, I guess, to the end goal of that. Because when I started, I was pretty much as the most lacking in self-esteem artist that a lot of artists are. And, I very rarely wanted to show my work. I didn't think I was any good. I didn't think I would get jobs. And I would apply places and things like that. But I think it showed that I wasn't very confident in my work. And I think I remember watching this TED Talk by Elizabeth Gilbert. She's the writer of Eat, Pray, Love. And she's an amazing motivational speaker. And she did this talk about creativity. And she talked about, the way that artists have changed over the years. And if you think back to Renaissance times and things like that, when an artist did a piece, they were really proud of it and everybody thought it was amazing. It wasn't just attributed to them. It was attributed to some muse or God or something like that, something outside of themselves was semi-responsible for them creating this wonderful piece. She didn't know when we made the transition from having that to taking all of this responsibility for creativity on ourselves. I am self-identified with my creativity. If I don't create something, then I am a failure in life. When did that happen, that we went down this really dark road to just being total failures if we didn't make some masterpiece? Something clicked in me then that art, like most things, it's a job, it's a process that you kind of have to push through. I didn't realize that, and it really made me want to try and make that confidence happen for myself. And so I kind of hit this okay, I can fake it until I make it situation where I can show to everyone else and put forward that I think my work's great and I can be confident about it. I can show it and be like, yeah, I did this and I really like it. And I think that's when I realized how much confidence made a difference. And then I started showing that. I still have that tinge of when somebody comes up and they're like, this is wonderful. I'm like, it could be better. It could be better. Instead of just being like, oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm glad you like it. It's a tough road for artists to try and not completely self-identify with your work and put it out there and just be like, here's this thing. I did it. It's wonderful. I hope you like it. So it definitely is a tough learning lesson.
So I'm going to out myself and say that I have never, for a long time, felt super confident in anything that I've done. I had a few pieces early on that I was like, yeah, this is awesome. And I'd show it to a friend and he'd be like, your painting is so mushy. That was exactly what he said. I'm curious though, for you and your journey, was it you were stretching a muscle and you had pieces that you were more confident and less? And I understand the fake it till you make it. I totally believe in this, but did you have pieces where you felt like you made a breakthrough, but then maybe after doing that, you couldn't quite figure out what it was that made you feel so good about that piece? So then you were two steps back and then you kept working and working, then another breakthrough. And it's sort of these breakthroughs started to happen more consistently where you're happy with your work, or I don't know. I'm just curious how it was for you as you're going through this transition.
Oh no, that definitely happens, because you'll hit pieces where something will come out and you'll put it online and people will absolutely love it. And you're like, wow, I didn't expect this piece to come out of me. I didn't expect I could do that. And then you try to do another one and it's like, no, it doesn't work at all. And the next one doesn't work at all either. And you kind of keep working to try and hit that point. I think it was Glenn Vilk who said that each artist has 10,000 bad drawings in them. And so you have to get out as many as you can as soon as possible. So that way you can start getting to the good drawings. I agree with that entirely, but I think it's a little, I don't think that any artist, well, at least I haven't hit the stage where I feel like every drawing from here on out is going to be amazing and it's going to be great. It's such a weird flow, the way that art works and the way that you change and your work changes. And sometimes it's going to be amazing and sometimes it changes on you and you're not ready for it. And, specifically for animation, when I made the transition into animation, because originally I was drawing way more realistic kind of stuff. When I started working at an animation company, I noticed my work start to make a change. It started to become, more animation oriented. And I look back to my old work and I was like, well, wait a second, I did this amazing piece and now I can't do that. Now I do this more animation style work. And I had to be like, okay, well, this is good though. And if I keep going down this path, I can come up with something and it'll come out different and my work has changed and that's okay. So I think your pieces, it's hard to say that one piece is going to be your best work or that you're going to be able to create the same amount of work. It's just your work's constantly going to change and you're going to have to embrace that and just go with it.
I think it, I breathe it. Look out at the rain. Where anybody sees only a drop of water rolling down the window, I see a universe of beings animated with all the passions common to physical life.
I've got one last question that I'm going to ask on behalf of the people that have asked me this. In the beginning of this call, you mentioned that your style is kind of like, not necessarily all over the place, but you can do a lot of different styles. How do you define your artwork, though? Like, if I was to look at your artwork and see your voice in it, or see a piece of you in every single thing, in every different style, what is it that, and maybe you haven't even thought about it until right now, but what is it that you would say is your voice, or how do you identify with your style, even though it goes in many different directions?
That is tough. I think what really shows in every single type of work that I do is an element of story, because I don't want anyone to look at a piece that I've done and not evoke some kind of thought or feeling or some kind of storyline in their head that they get from it. So every time I do something, that's what I try to think of. What story am I telling here? Like, even though it's a still image, there's no video to go with this or anything like that. What story can I evoke an emotion within this one piece? And I think that that's something that usually is always a trend in my work.
Awesome. I need to ask one more follow-up question, because this is another one that gets asked all the time. People, when I say, what do you want to do with their work? They say they want to work at Disney, but then they say, I want to tell stories with my artwork. And I feel like it's simple. Just tell a story. Just do something interesting. Like, give your character something to do. But so many people struggle with it that I feel like my answer is not adequate. And if somebody asked you that, what would you say when they tell you, I want to tell stories with my work?
Yeah, that's a very true thing. I think the hard part about that is making a realization of what you want to say. Before I start a piece and before I even begin sketching, I'm like, okay, if it could be like, okay, I want to draw a milkmaid with a cow. What do I want to say about this milkmaid? What do I want to say about this cow? Like, what is the story there? What am I? And if you don't have that concept, if you're just thinking about the shapes, if you're just thinking about what the image is going to look like, you're never going to get that amount of story or emotion from it, because you're not thinking about what the overall image is and what you as an artist want to portray to anybody else. It always comes down to what you're trying to say as an artist to other people. Basically, art is just a form of expression. And when we're kids and we start drawing, it's our way of expressing ourselves. It's our way of talking and sharing a piece of ourselves with someone else. So it's about finding that piece to give from yourself to someone else.
Awesome. I love it. And this is the perfect place to end things. Thank you so much. This is a great podcast episode. I don't know. I feel like we talked about so many cool, important things that if you're listening and any of this resonated, listen again. If you're looking for your first job or you're looking for your next job and you're sort of like getting started, there's so many good things that we covered here. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your experience and your knowledge and answering my oddball questions.
No, absolutely. It was a good time. Thank you.
All right. So lastly, where can people find your artwork online or get in touch with you? What's the best way to see some of your stuff?
If you go to EliseHathawayArt.com, that's my website. And you can also find me on Twitter at Elise Hatheway.
Awesome. And we'll also have show notes from this episode at pencilkings.com/Elise Hatheway. That will be ELISE-HATHEWAY. Thank you so much and have an awesome Thursday. It's almost the weekend.
I know.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
All right. Awesome.
Truth demands patience, skill, years of practice.
Ah, you talk like a fool. I would trade a century of practice for an ounce of inspiration.
That does it for another episode of the Pencil Kings podcast. If you'd like to check us out and see more about what we do, head on over to pencilkings.com. You can check us out on Facebook, Twitter, or everywhere. And, well, that's it. See you guys soon.